At least 0.5% of NVIDIA's 5070 Ti, 5090D, and 5090 GPUs are missing some of their ROPs, resulting in at least a 4% performance impact, which is a huge amount, considering that's the number that NVIDIA admitted to. But we have a fix for this problem, and we'd like to publicly propose it to NVIDIA. NVIDIA, the fix is stop telling people how many ROPs there are. Actually, just stop telling them much of anything. In the drivers, disable all the features that report back what's detected in the hardware. It's a mystery box of a GPU. It's time to start acting like the monopoly that you are and really take advantage of it. You've earned this monopolistic behavior. Now it's time to just drive it home. It's like the hotspot sensors where you set it to not work anymore because that would be useful. Now is a good time to just also disable reading anything else that could be wrong. No hyperbole here. This is officially the worst GPU launch that I have personally ever covered. Now, it was tied for a little bit with two other launches. One was AMD, one was also NVIDIA. The RTX 20 series, for example, the best thing it had going for it in terms of worst launches of all time, really, was the artifacting memory. The Space Invaders, it resulted in one of the best t-shirt designs we ever made. They had artifacting memory plus no namesake RT features for the RT graphics cards for like 50 days in games, in actual games, not just the Star Wars tech demo that NVIDIA made that you can look at with the shiny elevators. The 20 series also had abysmal pricing. It was some of the worst we'd ever seen until now. It was contending with leftover supply of the 1080 Ti, which was a better purchase at launch. Hell, we were even reminded of AMD's past launches, including Vega, with its multiple packaging technology failures, resulting in unlevel heatsink mounting in combination with its terrible initial drivers. I mean, there was a time when we installed AMD drivers for a test system, and it was the press drivers, and they were like 640 by 480, and then the screen turned green and then red, and then it flickered a lot, and this is worse than all of these things. The newest in a line of NVIDIA's multi-failure generation includes NVIDIA flying way too close to the sun with 12-volt 2x6, its paper launch, its fake prices, and its intentionally misleading charts about performance capabilities of the 50 series. And now there's another one, which is a total misrepresentation of the spec itself. Tech PowerUp uncovered that some RTX 5090 GPUs were missing 8 ROPs, or Raster Operations Pipelines, sometimes known as render output units. The end result was that a 5090 would show 168 ROPs instead of 176. On the 5070 Ti, the difference would be going to 88 ROPs from 96 ROPs, a huge swing. From 88 to 96, that's an increase of 9%. This may have greater than the prescribed 4% impact on performance, but we won't know until one of our viewers is able to find an affected unit and sell it to us. ROPs can have an impact on performance, especially as it relates to pixel processing, so differences in performance can emerge based on resolution and anti-aliasing settings in particular. We're not sure yet how much impact there will be, other than what NVIDIA has stated. TPU suggests, though, that some of their testing shows equivalence, while one test they had showed a 5% swing. And just as a quick aside here, this is why we need some of these cards, because we want to test them. So if you have a 5070 Ti where GPU-Z reports 88 ROPs, it'll be on the main page, or a 5090 where it reports 168 ROPs, then email tips, TIPS, at gamersnexus.net. We're putting a bounty on one RTX 5090 with missing ROPs and one RTX 5070 Ti with missing ROPs. We'll pay an extra $500 on top of whatever you paid on your receipt. You can check by installing GPU-Z, installing the drivers, that step is important, and running GPU-Z to check the main tab for ROPs count. We'll pay full retail and shipping so we can dig deeper into the performance impact. But back to it, NVIDIA has released a statement. Apparently this met the threshold for a rapid response. Maybe it was the fact that the news landed on a Friday. It perfectly lined up to bury the reply. But its other issues have gone unanswered. So let's get into it. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their new Duronaut thermal paste. Thermal Grizzly claims its Duronaut paste is intended for long-term stability and endurance, focusing on paste longevity in addition to the usual performance focus. Thermal Grizzly's Duronaut paste comes with applicators and spreaders, and ships in numerous tube sizes, aiming to provide a high-end paste for PC builds and daily driven overclocks by enthusiasts. Learn more at the link in the description below. So NVIDIA's response, here's what they said. Quote, we have identified, aka Tech PowerUp, but all right, we have identified a rare issue affecting less than 0.5%, 0.5%, of GeForce 5090, 5090D, and 5070 Ti GPUs, which have one fewer ROPs than specified. The average graphical performance impact is 4%, with no impact on AI and compute workloads. Affected consumers can contact the board manufacturer for a replacement. The production anomaly has been corrected, end quote. Now, NVIDIA stating one missing ROP was a little odd, but TPU also thought so. Tech Power Up wrote this, quote, "While NVIDIA talks about one ROP unit, this really means 8 ROPs in our context. Many years ago, marketing decided that higher numbers equal better, so they started to report the number of pixels that can be processed per unit instead of the actual unit count. So in this case, one hardware unit is disabled, which means 8 pixels per clock less can be processed, resulting in a loss of 8 ROPs, end quote. Now, a 4% swing is gigantic. First of all, 4% is enough to completely eradicate the gap that is between the 5070 Ti and the 4070 Ti Super in some instances, which is insane. It basically invalidates the reason you'd buy a 5070 Ti if it is even that little. The 5070 Ti, by percentage, is losing more of its ROPs than a 5090. So if the 5090 loss was 4% swing by NVIDIA's numbers here, the 5070 Ti might see more of a loss. Regardless, this performance swing is completely unacceptable. There's not that much performance gained over the last generation to begin with. And we'd also be shocked if NVIDIA didn't know about this ahead of launch. Secondarily, getting support from board manufacturers right now, which is what NVIDIA is suggesting, will be hit and miss on supply in terms of how fast you can get a replacement. There's going to be a lot of just sort of natural pressure where some people are like, I was scalped with this card, or I got really lucky when I sniped this card when it was restocked. I don't want to send it off into oblivion and wait an unknown amount of time to get a response, get one back. And so there's that natural impetus to just hold on to the card, even though it is deficient, which is really unfortunate. Either way, it depends how many that the manufacturers have retained for ARM8 purposes, and if those are also not defective. And once again, we'd be happy to buy one of each from our audience if you have one. But let's look at how this might have happened. This is a block diagram of the GB202 GPU, the GPU used in the RTX 5090. The GB202 full chip contains 12 GPCs, or graphics processing clusters. These containers each possess 8 TPCs, or texture processing clusters. Within each TPC are 2 SMs, streaming multiprocessors, but this is the full chip with all 96 TPCs in total. The full chip can have a maximum of 24,576 CUDA cores, but the 5090 has 21,760. That means that the 5090 has 85 TPCs to the 96 total, or in other words, NVIDIA is disabling 11 TPCs. This isn't abnormal, and there's nothing sketchy about this. This is actually just how the process normally works, where what's going on here is NVIDIA has some room for yields. They have room for a few defects within the silicon where they can toggle off components to still keep the silicon sellable as a lower bin 5090 from the full fat GB202 die. So that leaves some room for failures without one defect in the chip totally ruining the whole thing. In this situation, NVIDIA has room for up to 11 TPCs to be botched. It is intentionally disabling those, whether they're good or bad, to make a 5090. They could be flawless. Now, most likely they'd set that aside and maybe use it for a 5090 Ti or something. But in many cases, what happens is if a chip has enough of the physical hardware within it functioning that it clears the barrier to become whatever the card is, a 5090 in this instance, they might fuse off some of the other functioning parts to then create the 5090. It's supposed to go down from fully functioning or more than necessary function to the actual spec. Not what we're seeing here, which is going from the spec to something undefined and worse. But here's where we think it went wrong. This is a zoomed in look at a GPC. Notice that at the very bottom, there's a block of dark blue bars split into 8 partitions. Number 8 matches the number of ROPs that TPU reported as missing, so this is an important number. Notice that these 8 ROPs are aligned with 4 of the TPCs above them. There are 2 groups of 8 in one GPC, with each of the groups associated with a group of 4 TPCs. If NVIDIA's manufacturing had defects, or if it intentionally disabled too many adjacent TPCs, like shown in this logical diagram, then NVIDIA would lose access to the ROPs. Now, to be clear, the part that's coming up here is our best understanding of the situation, and it involves a little bit of speculation because NVIDIA hasn't been fully transparent, which to some extent is fine, but they haven't fully disclosed and discussed exactly how the TPCs connect to the ROPs. And so we're speculating a little bit in this next part. Back to the full diagram. The full GB202 diagram would accommodate 192 ROPs on a perfectly made chip that resembles this. Across 24 groups of 4 adjacent TPCs, totaling a max of 96, NVIDIA could lose TPCs in theoretically any distribution across the die as long as it doesn't drop below 22 groups of sufficiently adjacent TPCs to bring with them their 8 associated ROPs. Now, the key phrase in that sentence is sufficiently adjacent, which is intentionally vague and ambiguous from us. That's the speculation part, because what we don't know is what the maximum count of adjacent TPCs is that NVIDIA can lose before it then loses access to all 8 of the associated ROPs. So in other words, can it have 1 of 4 TPCs in a group and keep all 8 ROPs? Or does it need 2 of 4? Or does the adjacency of the groups of the TPCs where they're toggled, does that matter? That's what we don't know here. Even if NVIDIA toggles one entire GPC, as TPU showed in its review diagram here, it'd still have to pull another 3 TPCs from elsewhere. For instance, and based on this logical diagram, if NVIDIA loses 3 adjacent TPCs from one group versus 3 TPCs with 1 gap between them in a group, we're not sure how that affects which ROPs remain active. What we are fairly certain about is that losing all 4 adjacent TPCs would also eliminate their 8 associated ROPs. But it's our understanding that NVIDIA can also lose access to these ROPs if too many clustered TPCs are lost, even below what we think is the clear threshold of 4. That's how we understand it. We're not 100% sure on some of the factors here. With 176 ROPs in the official spec, NVIDIA can lose 11 TPCs distributed across the entire die without losing those extra ROPs. It's just the adjacency. And so as far as we can find, and read through the white paper and looked at some of the reports online, but the white paper was the big one, NVIDIA does not appear, at least as of writing this, to define how its ROPs are made accessible and through which pathways they connect to the rest of the chip. So we don't know the requirement from the TPCs associated with them in terms of how many are enabled, or if they can have like 1 and then a gap and then the remainder or something. Either way though, we think that NVIDIA may have had some devices manufactured in a way that lose these 8 ROPs based on this. And we know they have manufactured some incorrectly because they've admitted it. We think this is what it's related to. Now, frankly, we find it completely unbelievable that NVIDIA would ship these units unknowingly, because if NVIDIA actually did accidentally ship these, that is a level of incompetence that's honestly frightening and kind of shakes the foundation of the entire premise of why you buy NVIDIA. The whole point of buy NVIDIA is the same reason you bought Intel in the mid-2010s. So Intel was sort of the put-together professional of, you know you're going to get something that works in the mid-2010s. And AMD was like, I don't know, sniffing glue or something. Not really sure what AMD was doing back then. They've turned it around. It's good now for the CPU side. But NVIDIA is in that position. Intel was in the scenario where it's like, you buy NVIDIA because you're pretty sure it's just going to work. That's the thing the guy on the stage in the leather jacket said. He said it just works. And I don't know if he said it before Todd Howard or not, but that's something that Jensen Huang said. It's the whole premise of NVIDIA and paying more for it. And that foundation is starting to show cracks. This has been a disastrous launch for NVIDIA, and this is a level of incompetence. If they shipped these without knowing that there was this defect, that is terrifying, because every single chip is tested off the line. We know this for a fact. At the fab level, they test them electrically for the presence of all the physical hardware. They know precisely what is getting shipped. And at the board partner level, when they integrate the hardware, we, GN, we have been to factories where they assemble video cards off the SMT line. Every single video card factory I've ever been to has 100% of video cards function tested. Not only are 100% function tested, they function test them with at least 2 software suites. One is often their own proprietary thing, another is provided by NVIDIA. And we've never been allowed to show it, but I have seen it. And I know that it function tests for the presence of specific hardware units. And I find it completely impossible to believe that somebody didn't know about this and that this was a mistake. So that leaves the other option, which is malice. So NVIDIA's got 2 options here. They've got incredible, unprecedented incompetence from NVIDIA to not know this, or they have the malicious decision to ship it anyway and hope no one notices or deal with it later. So that's what I think. And if it's the incompetence option, fine. You can be incompetent if you want. There's nothing illegal about being incompetent. It might have consequences legally, but it's not illegal to be an idiot. And if that's the route that NVIDIA is going, then that, again, sort of calls into question why you buy NVIDIA to begin with. Because that's what you're paying for. It's the competence. They are put together. Their drivers haven't really been questioned for like a decade. Whereas Intel and AMD have both gone through really heavy scrutiny for drivers. And all of that comes down to the same thing. So it kind of comes down to, if such competence questions in QC are now involved at the chip level, it makes us question how much they tried to QC things like 575 watts down a 12-volt high-power cable. It calls the entire premise of the card into question for the 0.5% of fuck-ups. To ship 0.5% of its inventory with missing hardware that only the most advanced users would even notice is either a regrettable insight into NVIDIA's actual competence, or they thought they'd get away with it. That's what we think here. We're not sure which it is, but we don't see many other options. At the end of the day, this is completely unacceptable for a $2,000 video card or a basically $900 video card in the 5070 Ti. It's just like, this is insane. This is a completely absurd launch. And any one of these things, it's easy to look at it and be like, okay, I guess I get over that. So like, if this were the only problem in the whole launch, the tone would be totally different here, at least the way I'm presenting it, because it's just sort of that, it's the multiplication of fuck-ups here, where they've got the decision to continue using 12-volt high power, even though the GPU is pushing way closer to the safety margin than even the 4090 did, which everybody questioned. I mean, we were questioning this like a year ago or something, and then more recently, and so was Der Bauer and basically anyone else. But there's that decision. There's the ROPS thing. There's bugs in the drivers that we found when we were doing the MFG testing, where you could get the frames to render out of step. They would render in the incorrect order and create that micro stutter. It's really nasty. There's a really specific bug and situation, but the point is it exists. And any one of these things, it's much easier to be like, okay, I mean, you get a couple screw ups, but this is insane. And it's inexcusable for a company that markets itself the way that NVIDIA does. NVIDIA is destroying its brand credibility. The foundation, again, is showing those cracks. But coming back to that 4% comment from NVIDIA in its statement, this is obscene to read with such a cavalier and unapologetic tone to it, considering you can pay $3,000 to $300 for an Asus Astral SKU of a 5090. That would be hard-pressed to find a 4% improvement over a normal $2,000 5090. That's the entirety of the benefit of the extra $1,300. That's insane. 4% is a huge amount. I mean, this is from our live stream where we power modded a card and we overclocked it for hours, and at the end of the day, we got like 6 to 7% uplift. That with that effort, by pushing it 80, 90 watts over what it's supposed to be. And NVIDIA's over here talking about how it's a 4% change, as if that's supposed to be small. I mean, there's like, the tone was just so, they just shrugged it off. Up until yesterday, the RTX 5080 should have been immune to this. NVIDIA's statement omitted the card, and on a technical level, it makes sense that it'd be immune. The RTX 5080 has 10,752 CUDA cores and runs on the GB203 processor. GB203 per NVIDIA and on TPU has a maximum configuration size of 10,752 CUDA cores. Its maximum ROPS configuration is 112, which also matches the 5080. The 5080 appears to be a perfect cut of the GB203 dock, and so any missing ROPS would be accompanied by other missing components in theory, which would theoretically force a down bin as a salvage SKU to something else. But that doesn't appear to be the case anymore. A viewer emailed us an instance of a 5080 with missing ROPS and validated it with GPU-Z and 3D Mark. That same viewer was in contact with video cards and published a validated GPU-Z result to the TPU database, so you may have seen that story just pop up online. We're in the process of obtaining one, but this really throws a wrench into all of the theories and ideas, because this shouldn't be able to happen. Maybe it was actually a manufacturing process defect, but we maintain that they would know about this. But that brings us back to the problem with all of this, which is that NVIDIA has now shattered the trust that you can have to open a box of an NVIDIA product and expect the GPU to contain the parts they advertise to you. You have to look at this with a slippery slope argument. Fallacy as it may be, it starts to become a question of what else do they do this with? Could they do it with memory? It did that with the GTX 970 previously, and that was intentional. But the GTX 970 3.5 gigabyte situation has been long enough in the past that it's been wiped from memory. Did you see what So we're now at a stage where, with all of the other issues, it's not just this one thing getting blown out of proportion, which is, I think, probably what NVIDIA would feel like. With the collective of the problems, you simply can't trust that the thing you're taking out of the box has what it says it has and does what it says it does. And that's a big problem for NVIDIA. That is, to use the words that PR can quote and send up the chain, the foundation of NVIDIA's brand credibility that starts to crumble. It has fought very hard to earn that brand credibility, and it's that position Intel was in. And if NVIDIA doesn't fix this, like now, immediately, then this could be the change of the tide that we saw with Intel and AMD in the mid-2010s. The difference is that thus far, AMD's GPU division has given us little reason to think that they can capitalize on these scenarios. AMD has managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory at every possible corner over the last several years. So they really need to turn their stuff around too here, because this is the moment for AMD and Intel. And if they don't capture it, and they let it slip, then I mean, they're just going to completely miss out on this opportunity, and NVIDIA will go on and continue acting the way they do. So it's sort of the all three of them here are involved, but NVIDIA is the one that's really screwing up right now, and we're just not sure it's true anymore that you should pay top dollar for the put-together company if it is no longer put together. AMD and Intel have the opportunity of a lifetime to try and capitalize on this colossal series of fuck-ups from NVIDIA, where they have, NVIDIA has historically bad consumer segment sentiment right now. So that'd be people in the enthusiast, the gaming audience, which built NVIDIA, even though it's off chasing AI now, there's a big market in gaming, and losing that would matter. But maybe they don't care about that. And if that's the case, fine. But AMD and Intel have an opportunity here. The ball is in their court to capitalize on this. And really the only way AMD can screw up right now is probably pricing, unless it's just launches the worst regression of architectural and driver features in a long time. So pricing's the only place AMD can truly fuck it up big time. And then Intel, it seems like they just need to make more GPUs in the mid-range where they exist, and they really need to put out something that's a little higher end, like a B770 or something, if they want to capitalize on this. Because otherwise, this opportunity, it's not going to... NVIDIA is a very aggressive company, and I'll give them credit for this, which is that it does seem like when NVIDIA gets beaten down for a really terrible launch, like in the 20 series, they swing pretty hard when they come back. So they did this with the 3080. The 3080 was this like monstrous turning of the tide from the 2080 and the 2080 Ti launch. They brought the price down to 1080 Ti levels, like a $700 launch or something like that. And yes, the supply was not really available within about 2 weeks after launch. It was just gone forever. But they really turned it around on the launch of the 3080 versus the 2080 and 2080 Ti, regardless of whatever may have happened after that with the COVID boom and all of that stuff for hardware. And so they get aggressive. NVIDIA will, to quote someone who used to work at NVIDIA, who once was describing CEO Jensen Huang's mentality to me, the phrasing to me was, Jensen turns into an aggressive attack dog. That is how his behavior was described to me for this type of situation. So if that's still true, and if NVIDIA still cares about this market, there's a chance they look at this and they really get aggressive about trying to turn it around, rather than fighting from this position of hubris and fuck you, we're a monopoly, you'll buy it anyway. And so it really does come down to AMD and Intel, because this opportunity might not last. And even if it does last, if they're not going to really get aggressive in fighting NVIDIA, there's going to be no change to status quo there either. And you know, we'll see what happens. But either way, on NVIDIA's side, this has been an unfortunate insight into how the company is behaving right now. And we simply cannot recommend the 50 series at this moment. We'll see how the 5070 goes. We're going to review that one too. Maybe it looks a little better. But right now, we're going to stick with the stance we had for the 5070 Ti, which is just wait. Let's just wait and see what happens. At least the prices will cool down as the scalping gets less interesting for scalpers. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. And subscribe for more. You can go to store.gamersnexus.net to support us directly, or patreon.com/gamersnexus to throw a few bucks our way every month and help fund our reporting and our testing. We'll see you all next time.